Es war kurz nach 23 Uhr, und der Festsaal des Palais Blücher roch nach Wachs und frischem Puder und dem Champagner, den die Diener alle 20 Minuten nachschenkten. Constanze von Krautheim-Lüdenscheid stand neben der Gräfin Nesselrode und sprach Französisch über ein byzantinisches Psalterhandschrift aus dem 9. Jahrhundert, und ihre Stimme war ruhig und präzise, wie sie es immer war, wenn sie über etwas sprach, das sie wirklich interessierte. Sie hatte den Abend nicht genossen. Festsäle interessierten sie wenig. Aber die Gräfin war eine Gesprächspartnerin von echtem Gewicht, und das zählte. Dann hörte sie seine Schritte hinter sich. Sie erkannte sie, weil sie 4 Jahre gehabt hatte, sie zu erkennen. Und weil Konrad von Krautheim-Lüdenscheid immer ein wenig zu fest auftrat, als wäre der Boden unter ihm nicht sicher genug. Er kam mit 2 Gläsern. He left. She poured her tea. She did not open the folio. 2 years and 2 months before that December morning, Thornley House in Cavendish Square had been lit for dinner. 6 at table. Lord and Lady Carwick to Alaric's left, Lord and Lady Trenier beyond them, and Iphigenia at Alaric's right, which was where a duchess sat, which was where she had sat at every dinner in this house across 22 months of marriage. The candles had been burning 2 hours. The silver was the good Thornleigh silver, heavy and old. And the footmen moved behind the chairs with the particular silence of men who had been trained to be invisible. Iphigenia had been listening to Lord Carwick describe a dispute about drainage rights on his Northumberland estate. And she had been genuinely interested. Because drainage rights were a practical matter, and practical matters had become the substance of her days. She had been reaching for her wine glass when Alaric spoke. He had not been addressing the table. He had been speaking to Carwick in the manner of a man continuing a conversation already in progress. And what he said was this: I had not intended to marry at 33. Vesper Allingham would have suited me better in certain respects, but she refused me, and Iphigenia was a sensible solution. The table went quiet. Carwick stopped speaking. Lady Trenier's fork paused above her plate. Iphigenia raised her eyes to her husband's face. He had not yet registered that anything had changed. He was still looking at Carwick, his expression composed, the expression of a man who had said a reasonable thing in a reasonable tone. She studied him for 3 seconds. Then she set down her wine glass. I see, she said. Her voice carried to the footman at the sideboard. She knew it did, and she did not moderate it. You have had 22 months to tell me so, and you chose the Carwick's company for the occasion. I hope it satisfies them more than it satisfies me. She set her napkin on the table, precisely, folded once. I shall not require the carriage tonight, Alaric. I shall arrange my own. She stood. She walked out. She walked through the dining room door and through the hall and up the stairs to her dressing room. And she was shaking, not with grief, not with humiliation, but with 2 years of composed endurance that had found its end at last, and the sensation was not sorrow. It was hot. It was very nearly a relief. She removed her wedding ring. She placed it in the small porcelain dish on her dressing table, the one that had held her grandmother's hairpins before she inherited it, the one she had brought from Berkeley Square to Cavendish Square on the morning of her wedding. She looked at it sitting there in the dish. Then she went downstairs and instructed the hall porter to find her a carriage. And by 4 in the morning she was on the Great North Road, the city behind her, Berkeley Square ahead. At 3 o'clock that December afternoon, Thelwall returned to the morning room. Iphigenia had moved the folio to the side table and had not opened it. She told him her answer without preamble. The deed may be filed at Doctors' Commons regardless of any other matter, she said. I will not attend the dinner at Cavendish Square. I will receive His Grace at Berkeley Square on the Thursday following, if he wishes to call. Thelwall wrote it down. He left. That same evening, at Cavendish Square, Alaric read the message once. He set it on his desk. He sat with it in silence long enough that the fire needed tending. And then he took up his pen and wrote to Thelwall in his own hand. Proceed with the deed filing regardless of her attendance. He wrote separate notes to Lord and Lady Carwick, Lord and Lady Trenier, and to his brother Evander. The dinner at Thornley House would proceed as arranged on the 12th of November at the usual hour. The 6th seat would be set. He did not write that she was coming. He did not write that she was not. Lord Marchingham, learning of the arrangement through his own channels, Iphigenia had no illusions about how many channels her father maintained, was not invited. He did not write to Alaric about it. He did not write to Iphigenia about it. He was gathering himself, which was always what Marchingham did before he acted, and she knew the shape of it as well as she knew the shape of her own hands. In his study at Cavendish Square, Alaric opened the locked drawer of his desk and looked at the small porcelain dish inside it. He had found it on her dressing table the morning after she left. The ring sitting in it, the dish placed with the same precision she brought to every arrangement she made. He had moved it to the drawer himself. He did not know when he did it, whether the act was preservation or punishment. He opened the drawer once a week and looked at it. He had not touched the ring. Iphigenia established herself at Berkeley Square in the first weeks of the separation with a thoroughness that left no room for the interpretation that she had gone there to recover before returning. She received her sister, Lady Augusta Dalbrook, who lived 4 streets away and arrived within 2 days without being sent for, bringing her own cook's ginger biscuits and the good sense not to offer an opinion. Iphigenia resumed her correspondence with the Marchingham Widows' Fund Board from her own writing table. She instructed her solicitor that no duchy footman was to be seconded to her household. Society noted her continued absence from Cavendish Square with the particular attentiveness that London society reserved for a public marriage with a private difficulty. She did not explain herself. Explanation was not the project. In the 2nd month, Lord Evander Thornlea rode uninvited from London to Thornlea Hall in Yorkshire. He arrived near midnight. The hall porter let him in because the porter had served the family for 19 years and understood that Lord Evander's arrivals were seldom comfortable and always necessary. Alaric was in the study. He heard his brother's boots on the flagstone and looked up from the desk without surprise. Evander sat down across from him and did not speak for a moment. He was 30 years old and had been a younger brother long enough to know when comfort was not the thing required. "I want to tell you what I saw," Evander said, "across 2 years of visiting this house and yours. I want you to hear it without interrupting me." Alaric said nothing. He folded his hands on the desk. "She was at breakfast at 7:30 every morning," Evander said. "She ate porridge because the kitchen here made it better than they did at Berkeley Square, and she told the cook so by name. Mrs. Hartley. You never knew Mrs. Hartley's name. I know this because I asked Iphigenia once, and she told me. And I asked you once, and you looked at me as though I had asked about the kitchen at Windsor." He paused. "When the miscarriage happened, she told you 3 days late. I know because she told me 4 days late. And she told me she had already told you. And when I asked how you had received the news, she said, 'He was very kind.' She said it the way a woman says something when she has stopped expecting anything more than kindness." He stopped. The fire crackled. She thanked the footmen by name. Every time. You never registered the names. I watched you across 7 dinner tables not register the names. Alaric had not moved. His hands were still folded. You are not a cruel man, Evander said. That is the difficulty. A cruel man she could have named. What you gave her was management. You managed her. You managed the household and the estate and the charitable subscription and the marriage. And you managed Iphigenia right out of her own house. A long silence settled between them. I don't know what to do with that, Alaric said. His voice was level. It cost him to keep it so. Evander reached into his coat and set a blank-bound notebook on the desk beside his brother's hand. Write down every sentence you spoke to her, all of them in your own hand. Do not send it to her. I will ask you in a month what you have learned. He stood. I am staying 3 days. I should like breakfast at 8 if Mrs. Hartley is available. He left the study. Alaric looked at the notebook for a long time. Then he opened it to the first page and picked up his pen and wrote the first sentence he could remember speaking to his wife. There was not a question about the household accounts. He filled 1 page, then 2. Then he stopped and looked at what he had written and understood, for the first time, that the exercise was going to be more difficult than he had anticipated. By the 3rd month of the separation, Iphigenia had moved the Widows' Fund Board meeting to Berkeley Square for the first time in the fund's history. The subscribing members club had always hosted it. She had never thought to question the arrangement. Now she set up the meeting room herself, instructed the housekeeper on the placement of chairs, and sat at the head of the table in her own house with the subscription roll before her. The Thornley subscription appeared above her name on the roll, as it had for 20 years. The Duchy's public commitment to the Marchingham Widows' Fund, which Alaric had maintained without comment, and which she had never thanked him for because she had assumed it was simply what the Thornley Duchy did. She did not remove it from the roll. She signed her own letter of acknowledgement in her own name, as founding board member, not as the Duchess of Thornley. The distinction was small. She made it anyway. In the 4th month, Alaric instructed his steward to produce the full Thornley estate ledgers. He had been writing in the notebook for 6 weeks, and Evander's instruction had expanded in his mind to include the accounts as well as the words. If he was cataloging what he had managed and what he had missed, the ledgers were part of the catalog. His steward, a man named Prestwick, who had served the duchy for 11 years, brought the books without apparent concern. Alaric spent a morning with them. By noon, he had found the pattern. In the columns for the first 18 months of the marriage, a series of tenant arrears appeared. Arrears that should have been carried on the duchy account, that Prestwick had recorded as settled, that were settled, but not from the account Alaric had assumed. The reference was his solicitor's, not Thelwall's, but the solicitor Iphigenia had retained separately, the one she had instructed from her own settlement. £4,200, paid in 12 separate disbursements across 18 months, entered quietly in a column Alaric had not examined because Prestwick had told him the arrears were managed. They were managed by his wife, from her own money, while his steward concealed the debt. Alaric sat with the ledger for an hour. He did not summon Prestwick. He did not send a note to Thelwall. He sat with the numbers and their implications, and he understood that he had spent 2 years believing he had carried her. And the ledger was telling him something entirely different. That night, he opened the notebook to page 29 and wrote for a long time. That same week, Lord Marchingham arrived at Berkeley Square without appointment. Iphigenia was in the morning room when the butler announced him, and she told the butler to show him in. Not to the drawing room, which was the room for guests she chose to honor, but to the morning room, where she was already sitting, with her correspondence spread before her and no intention of clearing it. Her father was 58 and had the bearing of a man who had never in his life been refused a seat in his own preferred room. He took the chair across from her with the expression of a man who had noticed the morning room and drawn his own conclusions. "Iphigenia," he said, "this has gone on long enough." "Has it?" she said. She did not look up from the letter she was reading. "You have made your point. The Tun has observed it. Thornleigh has observed it. I am asking you, as your father, to return to Cavendish Square before this becomes something that cannot be undone." She set the letter down. She looked at him directly. "I am not returning to Cavendish Square at your instruction, Father. I want to be clear about that. The Marchingham parliamentary interest is your management," she said, "not mine. I have not been your parliamentary instrument since my wedding morning, and I am not prepared to become one now." She folded her hands on the desk. "I paid £4,200 of Thornleigh's tenant arrears from my own settlement in the first 18 months of my marriage. I paid it quietly because his steward was concealing the debt, and I did not wish to embarrass my husband in front of his own people. I will not be told by you that I have been insufficiently obliging." She paused. "You may write to me, but I will not receive you again in this house on this subject. Not today, not in 6 months, not ever." Marchingham looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face that was not anger. It was closer to recognition, the look of a man who has produced something and is encountering it for the first time as an independent force. He stood. He did not take tea. He left without speaking again, and the morning room door closed behind him. And Iphigenia sat very still for a moment before she picked up her letter and resumed reading. In the 7th month of the separation, Marchingham wrote to Alaric at Yorkshire. The letter was 3 pages, measured in tone, and offered to broker Iphigenia's return on terms he described as favorable to both houses. He named the parliamentary committee seats her public absence was affecting. He named 2 members of the Thornleigh constituency who had made inquiries. Alaric read the letter at his desk in the Yorkshire study. He wrote back the same day in a single sentence. "I do not require my wife returned to me by her father." He signed it with his title and sent nothing further. And the 8th month brought the Widows' Fund benefit concert in London, and Iphigenia attended it in a new dress. Dark blue, which Augusta said suited her better than the gray she had been wearing since January. In the anteroom, waiting for the second half to begin, she encountered Viscountess Ennisfort. She knew who Vesper Ennisfort was. She had known for 3 years, in the way that a woman who has married a man 6 weeks after he proposed to someone else always knows who that someone else is. Vesper Ennisfort was 33, and had the air of a woman who had arrived at her own life by a route she had chosen deliberately. She greeted Iphigenia with a directness that was not unkindness. "I have wanted to speak with you," Vesper said. "I hope you will permit me 7 minutes, because I think 7 is what honesty requires, and more than that would be presumption." 7 minutes, Iphigenia agreed. "I refused Alaric Thornleigh in 1824 because after 3 seasons I concluded he did not know me," Vesper said. "Not in any particular respect. In general, he was attentive and correct and entirely absent. I told him so when I refused him, and he received it with great composure, which was rather the point." She paused. You married him 6 weeks later knowing that, because the Earl of Marchingham required the alliance, and you were the daughter who was available. I know this because everyone in London knew it, and I have thought about it many times in the years since. She looked at Iphigenia steadily. You are the braver of the two of us. I want you to know I think so. Iphigenia was quiet for a moment. Thank you, she said. I appreciate your saying so. Then she asked Vesper about the Ennisfort estate in Shropshire, and they spoke about drainage improvements for the remaining 4 minutes, and parted on terms that were not quite friendship and were not nothing. She did not tell Augusta about the conversation. She kept it herself, in the place where she kept things that were hers alone. That same month, at Augusta's dinner table, Iphigenia laughed. Augusta's husband had said something about a horse, a story about a horse and a gate and a vicar. And Iphigenia laughed before she had decided to, the way laughter comes when a person is not guarding against it. Augusta noticed. She said nothing. She refilled Iphigenia's glass, and the evening continued. And at the end of it, walking home through the cold Berkeley Square streets, Iphigenia noticed that she had laughed, and that she had also offered an opinion at dinner about the road repairs on the north side of the square, and that she had eaten everything on her plate. She had begun, without marking the moment it happened, to want things again. In the 9th month, Thelwall finalized the deed and presented it to Alaric at Cavendish Square. Alaric read it through once, signed it without amendment, and handed it back. His notebook had reached page 41. He closed it that evening and placed it in the locked drawer beside the porcelain dish. He did not reopen it. In the 10th month, the December morning on which the story began, Thelwall arrived at Berkeley Square at 8 o'clock with the folio, and Iphigenia sat with her teapot and gave him her answer at 3. 1 week later, the anniversary dinner at Thornley House proceeded. The Carwicks arrived at 7:30. The Treniers arrived at 7:45. Alaric received them in the drawing room and then led them through to the dining room, where 6 places were set. The 6th chair at his right remained empty. He did not explain it. He told the butler to serve at 8. They ate through 7 courses. The candles burned down an inch. Lady Trenier spoke about her daughter's new house in Bath. Lord Carwick spoke about the drainage dispute, which had not yet been resolved. Alaric answered them and poured their wine, and was present at his own table in the way he was always present, correct, attentive, and in the particular sense that Evander had named for him across 41 pages of his own handwriting, absent. At the 2nd hour of candlelight, the same hour to the minute, Alaric set down his glass and rose. The table went quiet. Lady Carwick looked at him. Lord Trenier looked at the empty chair and then at Alaric. I asked you here because you were present 2 years ago, Alaric said, and because I owe you an account of what has happened since. Not on behalf of the duchy. On my own behalf. He was not reading from anything. He had not written this out. I have spent 9 months writing down every sentence I can remember speaking to my wife across 2 years of marriage. I have 41 pages. 11 of those sentences are ones I would not be ashamed to repeat in her presence. The other sentences are not cruel. They are the sentences of a man who was managing a household and had confused management with attention. No one spoke. The footman at the sideboard had gone entirely still. I told you 2 years ago tonight that I married Iphigenia because Vesper Allingham refused me, Alaric continued. That was honest about the wrong thing. Vesper Allingham refused me because she spent 3 seasons concluding that I did not know her. She was correct. I have learned this from my brother, who learned it from Vesper herself. I married Iphigenia 6 weeks after that refusal and told myself it was strategic management. I spent 2 years maintaining, privately, a comparison between the two women that was its own form of unfaithfulness. Measuring my wife against a woman who had the good sense to decline me. What I have not admitted, until I wrote it down in my own hand, is that Iphigenia was the better of the two from the first week. I did not marry her because Vesper refused me. I spent 2 years refusing to see what I had actually done. He paused. The candles guttered in a draft from the hall. Mr. Thelwall will register the deed of settlement at Doctors' Commons on Monday, he said. The charitable trust and the £4,200 with 5 years' interest are hers regardless of what she decides about this house. That is not a negotiation. It is a correction. He sat down. The 4 guests finished their dessert. The room held a stillness that was not discomfort. It was the quiet of people who had heard something they had not expected and were sitting with the weight of it. At last, before Lady Carwick rose, she looked at Alaric across the table with the directness of a woman who had been married 30 years and had learned to say the true thing without decoration. "You have spoken to the wrong person, Thornleah," she said. "But you have spoken." The guests left at 10:30. At 11, Alaric sat alone at the table with the empty chair. The candles had burned low. He took out a sheet of paper, wrote 1 line, and rang for the hall porter. The deed is filed Monday either way. A. The note reached Berkeley Square at 11:30. Iphigenia read it at her writing table in the morning room, still dressed, her own candle burning beside the untouched folio. She sat with it for 3 minutes. Then she wrote back 1 line and gave it to her own porter. "Come to the garden here on Thursday at 4. Thursday at 4 o'clock. The Berkeley Square garden was gray with December frost, and the light was already failing. Iphigenia stood at the garden gate in her outdoor coat and watched Alaric come along the pavement. He had walked, which surprised her. She had expected a carriage. He arrived at the gate and stopped. "Your Grace," she said. He met her eyes. "Iphigenia," he said. She opened the gate and they walked. She kept the gravel path between them, not by calculation, simply by not closing the distance. They walked to the far end of the garden and back before she spoke. "Tell me about the Yorkshire tenants," she said. "The Hartley farm and the Mossbrook holding. I saw the arrears in the ledger summary Thelwall sent me." He told her. He told her about the Hartley family's bad harvest and the drainage problem at Mossbrook, and he told her what he had done about each. And he told her what he had not yet managed to resolve and why. He did not dress it. He told her what he did not know, which she noticed, because he had not previously been a man who readily admitted what he did not know. At the gate, when they returned to it, he did not offer his hand. She did not offer hers. They stood on either side of the latch. "Next Thursday?" he asked. She gave a single nod. "Yes," she said. He walked back along the pavement. She went inside. The Thursday visits continued through January and February and into March, always at Berkeley Square, always at 4, always the garden, or, when the weather was too hard, the morning room with the door left open to the hall. He came every week. He did not arrive early. He did not stay past the hour. He answered her questions about Yorkshire and about the Widow's Fund subscription and about Evander, who had been posted to Ireland and was writing letters that were, Alaric said, characteristically direct. In April, on a Thursday when the first crocuses were showing in the garden border, she asked to see the notebook. He brought it the following week. He handed it to her at the garden gate without explanation. She took it inside and read it across 2 days in her aunt's old morning room. sitting in the chair by the window with the light on the pages. She read all 41 pages. She read the 11 sentences he had marked as ones he would not be ashamed of. She read the others, which were not marked, and which were worse not because they were cruel, but because they were the record of a man who had been entirely, consistently, unintentionally elsewhere. She returned the notebook on the following Thursday. She handed it back to him at the gate. She said nothing about its contents. The act of returning it was the only comment she made, and they both understood what it meant. The following week, he asked if she would come to Cavendish Square. Not to dinner, not to the drawing room. He wanted her to see his study. She considered it for a moment, then said she would come on Wednesday at 11. She entered Thornley House for the first time since the walkout on a Wednesday morning in late April through the front door, which the butler opened as though she had never left. She did not look at the dining room as she passed it. She followed Alaric to the study. The study was as she remembered it. The large desk, the bookshelves, the pair of windows onto the Cavendish Square garden. Alaric stood beside the desk. He did not open the locked drawer. He simply stood there, not speaking. And she understood that the invitation was to do what she needed to do. She crossed the 4 feet of study floor. She placed her right hand flat against the locked drawer front and held it there. The wood was cool. She could feel through the grain of it, the faint solidity of what was inside. "You kept it where I put it," she said. "In the same dish," he said. "I did not touch it." She stood with her hand against the drawer for another moment. Then she lifted it and stepped back. "I shall come back in May," she said. "Do not move it yet." He said he would not. In May she told Thelwall, and told Alaric directly, on a Thursday in the garden, that she would return to Thornley House in June. Her own rooms, her keys held by her. The connecting door, a question for a later time. Berkeley Square titled to her, not rolled into the duchy, not transferred, not managed. Hers, the way her aunt had left it, the way it had been on the morning she married. Alaric said yes to each condition, in order, without negotiation. In June, on a Thursday, she arrived at Berkeley Square as usual. Alaric arrived at 4 as usual. They walked the garden. When they came back to the morning room, she told him to sit down, and he sat. And she stood in front of him and told him what she was going to do. "I am going to kiss you once," she said. "It is not an invitation to anything further. I want to find out whether my own hands know you." He was very still. She crossed to him. She did not take his face. She placed her left hand flat against the side of his throat, feeling his pulse against her palm. Steadier than she had expected, or perhaps she had not known what to expect. Her right hand she placed at his jaw. She kissed him, one long, unhurried kiss, and she counted her own breath through it. And when she had finished, she kissed him a second time. Shorter, warmer, the kind of kiss that comes when the first has answered something. Her left hand stayed at his throat. She could feel his pulse the whole time. When she stepped back, she studied him for a moment. "Next Thursday," she said. "I will tell you whether I wish to do that again." She stepped back. He did not speak. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before, which was the expression of a man who has understood, for the first time, that something valuable is actually present and that he had nearly let it go. August at Thornley House. On a Tuesday morning she did not announce in advance. Iphigenia unlocked the connecting door between their rooms from her side. She used her own key. She told Alaric at dinner that evening, plainly, that she had done it. He said thank you. He did not go through it that night or the night after. She had not expected him to. The unlocking was her act. not an instruction. September. Thornley Hall, Yorkshire. Harvest dinner for 16. The tenants from the Hartley and Mossbrook farms, and the others. The vicar, Evander, back from Ireland with a new scar on his chin, he declined to explain. Lady Augusta, who had come up from London on the mail coach and arrived complaining cheerfully about the roads. And Lord Marchingham, who arrived at noon in his own carriage at Iphigenia's own invitation, written in her own hand. He came because she had invited him, which was the first time in her life she had issued the invitation rather than received the instruction. He sat at table. He ate his dinner. He was civil to the tenants and civil to Evander, and he did not speak to his daughter privately because she had not offered him a private conversation. And Marchingham understood, at last, the shape of what was and was not available to him. Iphigenia sat at the foot of the long table. Alaric sat at the head. The candles were tallow, not wax. It was a working dinner, not a formal one. And the room smelled of roast meat and harvest dust and the particular warmth of a room full of people who had worked hard in the same fields. When the toast was called, Iphigenia rose before Alaric could. He looked down the table at her and made a small gesture. "The table is yours." And sat back. She raised her glass. "To the 2nd year of this marriage," she said, "which begins tonight." The tenants cheered without knowing what it meant. Evander raised his glass and caught Augusta's eye across the table, and Augusta raised hers, and they said nothing, which was the right thing. Marchingham lifted his glass. His face was composed. Iphigenia met his eyes once, briefly, and then looked away. Later, in the bedroom at Thornley Hall, the connecting door had been open 3 weeks, and the opening of it had been unremarkable, which was what she had wanted. Iphigenia came in from her dressing room and found Alaric already there. On the nightstand, the small porcelain dish sat in the candlelight. He had moved it from the Cavendish Square desk drawer to this room himself in June when she had returned. It was empty. Iphigenia sat at the edge of the bed. She looked at the dish. Then she looked at her left hand, where the ring had been since she put it back on that morning, alone in her Berkeley Square dressing room before the carriage came. "I put it back on this morning," she said. "I want you to know I put it back on alone." "I know," he said. He had noticed it at breakfast and had not mentioned it all day, because she had not offered the fact, and it was hers to offer. She looked at him. Then she reached forward and took the ring off herself, once, and set it in the dish on the nightstand. She turned back to him. "I take it off when I want to," she said. "I put it on when I want to. That is what has changed, Alaric." His voice was quiet. "Yes," he said. She reached for him. The September window was open, and the Yorkshire night came in, cool and ordinary, smelling of harvest fields in the first edge of autumn. The ordinary dark of a place where the day's work was finished and the morning's work had not yet begun. The porcelain dish sat on the nightstand with the ring inside it, where she had put it, where she would retrieve it herself in the morning.